This chapter is about menstruation. There are three things three chapters we are going to cover. One's called menstruation, which is hayd, ha ya dad, hayd. Okay. The second is nifas, which is nifas is bleeding, hayd is bleeding, and one is istihada, that's bleeding. So a woman may bleed for many reasons or few reasons, and they are categorized either as hayd, as menstruation, or istihada, or nifas. Each one of them has their own masail, their own issues we need to learn. Okay? First of all, what is hayd? Hayd is the bleeding a mature female, okay, she would have bleeding every month at least. In general, we know it as menstruation cycle. Okay, that bleeding, the period of bleeding is called hayd, which we translate as menstruation, right? And with that, you must learn, let's say in a month, there are days where she bleeds, that's hayd, and then there are days which she doesn't bleed. That's called tuhur. Tuhur means a clean period. All right? So once we learn this subject, once we learn what is hayd, what categorized as menstruation, then whatever is not menstruation, the period which is not menstruation is the period of tuhur. And any bleeding that happens to her other than hayd, which happens in the period of tuhur, that would be known as istihada. The hayd is what we are talking about in this subject, and istihada. So hayd is menstruation, and the bleeding which is not categorized as menstruation is known as istihada. So these two we will use a lot more. Nifas is post-birth bleeding, is when women gives birth, and that bleeding which follows, that's nifas. So we can leave that aside. So hayd and istihada is two types of bleeding we will deal with. Okay? So hayd is menstruation, and istihada is the bleeding which does not, which cannot be categorized as menstruation. So there are two types of bleeding. Okay? The period of hayd, menstruation, is obviously the bleeding period, and the period which is not menstruation, in English we don't have a word for it, but it's called tuhur, tahara, in Arabic. So hayd versus tuhur, in a month, women would normally have two periods. One is hayd, one is tuhur. Clear so far? Okay. So hayd is the bleeding which a healthy, mature woman would have on monthly basis, and in health and normality, there is nothing wrong with her. In fact, if she didn't have menstruation, she would be worried. There are health worries if there is no menstruation, but normal healthy women would bleed every month at least. Istihada is abnormal bleeding. Whatever is, it can be due to illness. Can be due to illness. Or it may be sign of something being wrong. This is an unexpected blood, unexpected bleeding. A normal healthy woman would probably have menstruation period, a fixed period, maybe 6-7 days a month, and then she'll have a clean period, and that would just every month continues. But where there is something out of something is not normal, or something is not, well, medically someone may argue that that's normal, but if there is additional bleeding to that would that be categorized as menstruation or not? This is what we will discuss. If that can be categorized as menstruation, then no problem. But if it cannot be, the additional bleeding, if it cannot be categorized as menstruation, where does it go? It's called istihada. Okay, so far making sense? And if you remember, we in the bab of wudu and ghusl, we covered a hadith where Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was asked about one of the Sahabiyat. She asked, she never stops bleeding, her menstruation never ends. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said what? إِنَّمَا ذَلِكَ عِرْقٌ. This is a vein. وَلَيْسَ بِالْحَيْضَةِ. This is not hayd. He told her this is not hayd, it is a bleeding from a vein, meaning maybe due to an illness or an injury or something. It is not hayd. Not every bleeding is menstruation. Okay? Menstruation is normal, but not every bleeding is categorized as menstruation. So, in language, hayd in language means to flow. All right, but in Sharia, in Sharia, in Fiqh, it is the blood which the women see coming out of the vaginal passage. It is not due to illness or any problem. Neither is due to childbirth, because that has a different category. The menstruation is a normal bleeding found in adult, mature women. Okay, if you look in your normal description, non-Sharia description, or if you look in any medical book, it will be the simple explanation of menstruation would be it's a monthly shedding of the lining of the uterus, which is characterized by bleeding from the vaginal passage. So women, they build up, if you have, what happens is, this is a natural system where Allah has set for a lining to build up, ready for pregnancy to take place. If the pregnancy doesn't take place in that period, then that lining is sheds off, and then it starts again. Within the woman reproductive system, there is a system from Allah that a lining which appears and it stays for a while. If it allows for the pregnancy to happen, if the pregnancy doesn't happen, then that line sheds off in the form of bleeding, and then the process starts again once the bleeding stops. Okay, so it only happens really in women when they reach reproductive age. So she can become pregnant, and then if the pregnancy doesn't take place in that month, then that it sheds off. Okay, that is normally, it is called as menstrual cycle. So it's that period where the bleeding happens, and then it starts all over again until the bleeding happens again.